Next up is someone from VolitionRx. It's ticker VNRX. We have Scott Powell. He is Executive VP and Head of Investor Relations. Welcome, Scott.
Thank you very much. Great to be here again. Thanks to Benzinga for having Volition back to present our story once again.
Absolutely, sir. Take it away.
Great, will do. So we are VolitionRx Limited. Would like to point you to our forward-looking statements and disclaimer. Just remind the audience today that I will be making some forward-looking statements on today's call, so I do point you to this obligatory disclaimer. A little bit about Volition. We have four verticals within the company. NuQ on the top left, that's an acronym for nucleosome quantification. Those are our programs in human health, specifically in developing blood tests to screen for a variety of human cancer types. NuQ Vet, there in the center, is our animal health program. That is commercial stage. We, about 1 year ago, launched our blood test to screen for two common canine cancers. NuQ Nets, that's our first significant foray into looking at non-oncology based disease states. We're looking at our ability to use our technology to predict which patients post-infection from sepsis and or COVID are likely to progress to the severe immune response of those two diseases. And NuQ Capture is really our R&D program, where our patents are housed, and a lot of our R&D work is done through that vertical. I won't talk much about that vertical, although I'll just point out that we do have significant intellectual property. We have a number of patents granted in the US, in Europe, and globally. We have a very strong patent portfolio. That's all I'll say on the NuQ Capture vertical. Moving to first discuss NuQ Vet, because that's probably of most interest to the listeners today, because that is our first commercial product. So bear with me while I just skip through the slide deck a little bit. And the brand name of this blood test is the NuQ Vet Cancer Screening Test. You can see the opportunity here is pretty significant. 38% of all US households have a canine. There are 77 million canines in just the United States alone. And you can see the other number here, that there are 20 million canines age 7 and older. That's an important statistic. 83% of canines visit a veterinarian at least once per year. 3/4 of those visits are for routine or preventative care. So there's high rates of canine ownership. There are a lot of canines in the US, and it's a fairly large market for us, because many canine owners are taking their animal to the vet for both sick and wellness checks. And that's how we plan to position our blood test. On the one side, it could be a test for symptomatic canines that have come down with a variety of ailments. And what vets tell us is that the vets have a very hard time, particularly on that first sick visit, differentiating between what's causing these symptoms. It could be cancer, but in many cases, it's just an infection or inflammation. And the doctors have a hard time differentiating between those three causal factors. So they're telling us that if they had a blood test, like one from Volition, that could be run on that first sick visit to rule in or rule out cancer as the causal factor, they would then have a lot more information to work with. And therefore they could, if it's confirmed as cancer, then the veterinarian could proceed to more invasive diagnostic tests, such as a biopsy or imaging technologies, which are obviously more expensive and more invasive. And if the blood test comes back negative, then both the canine owner and the veterinarian feel much more comfortable that it's not a cancer as the causal factor, and often send the animal home with perhaps some anti-inflammatory or antibiotics for the canine owner to put into the canine's dog food. So it would be a very useful piece of information on the symptomatic side, because obviously if cancer is ruled in, then the confirmatory diagnostic tests will be run, and then they'll be able to begin therapeutic treatment much sooner, because they know that it is coming from a cancer type. On the other side of the equation, our blood test could be positioned for asymptomatic screening of canines. You can see the number here, 20 million canines in the US are age 7 and older. Just like in human health, age is strongly correlated with a variety of cancer types. Same with canines. The older a canine gets, just the more predisposed that canine is to developing a particular cancer type. Now, in human health, there really aren't a lot of cancer types for which we screen asymptomatically. Mammography for breast cancer, a PSA test for prostate cancer, a colonoscopy for colon cancer. But for a lot of other human cancers, we don't screen asymptomatically. We only screen for certain cancers if you're considered high risk, right? So think pancreatic cancer, liver cancer, lung cancer. The general population does not get screened asymptomatically for those cancer types. In animal health, it's even worse. There's virtually no asymptomatic screening done in canines for cancers, right? You don't take an otherwise well canine to the vet to get screened for various cancer types. They don't have the tools. It's just not done. So this is a really disruptive product that we have entered the market with, because just like in human health, if a canine cancer can be detected while the canine is still well or asymptomatic, then that cancer type is likely a very early stage cancer. Therefore, it can be treated more effectively, and the therapeutic options are much more plentiful at that stage when the canine is still asymptomatic. Just like in human health, if you're symptomatic and then you're diagnosed with a cancer type that's the causal factor for those symptoms, invariably it's a late stage cancer that you have, and your outcomes, your options are not plentiful or good in most cases. So really excited about this product and the opportunity here that this presents for Volition. We sell it to Texas A&M for $45 per test. Our cost of goods is around $5, so we have a significant profit margin on this particular product. In terms of accuracy, you can see some of the clinical data from our studies at Texas A&M University. That is our exclusive partner currently. And when I say exclusive, I mean it's the only place that the blood test is for sale. Currently, it's through the A&M website. You can see the results here from our studies that we ran at Texas A&M. We had really strong results in both canine lymphoma and hemangiosarcoma. Those are two very common canine cancers, accounting for about 1/3 of all cancer types in canines in the US. You can see that in lymphoma, we achieved an area under the curve, or an AUC of 87.3%. When you break that out into your false negative rate and false positive rate, we had 77% sensitivity. That means we accurately flagged or had positives for more than 3/4 of canines that actually had lymphoma. And that was at 97% specificity. So 97% of the canines that came back as positive for lymphoma actually had lymphoma. So very, very high specificity, which means a very low false positive rate. In hemangiosarcoma, the results were even more spectacular. We achieved an area under the curve of 97.6%. That equated to 82% sensitivity, or accurately identifying 82% of canines with hemangiosarcoma, again at 97% specificity. So 97% of those that came back with a positive result actually had hemangiosarcoma. Really good results in these two cancer types. By way of comparison, if you look at other blood tests, and there are very few that are in the market and that are used as frontline screens for any cancer type, most common being the PSA test for prostate cancer in men. By way of comparison, the sensitivity for the PSA, depending on the clinical study, tends to be in the mid-60s to low 70s, and the same for specificity. And yet that's a very commonly administered blood test to screen for prostate cancer in men, of course. And the results we're getting here in these two canine cancers are substantially better than other blood tests that are out there on the market. We have also announced publicly, particularly on our last earnings call, that we are in advanced discussions with a number of potential partners for a licensing deal to license this blood test to one or more large animal health diagnostics companies in the United States. So we're hopeful that we'll be able to ink a licensing deal that is very attractive to Volition and to our shareholders. So stay tuned for additional news on those developments if they do materialize. Moving to to Nu.Q NETs. This is our program in human health, and this is our first movement into looking at non-oncology disease states, so non-cancer diseases. We're looking at sepsis and COVID-19. And I want to reiterate that this is not a frontline test to screen and tell a patient if they have sepsis or COVID-19. Rather, its purpose would be as a prognostic tool or a risk stratification tool to identify those patients infected with these two pathogens, which of those individuals are likely to have the very severe response to infection of these two diseases. So we call it Nu.Q NETs because it's short for netosis. And netosis is one of your body's first lines of defense. So when your body is infected with a particular pathogen, in this case, if you're infected with COVID-19 or with sepsis, one of the body's initial immune responses is to inject neutrophil extracellular traps, or NETs is the acronym, into your from your white blood cells into your bloodstream. And there's a image here that you can see. It acts like a net or a spider web, and the objective is to envelop, kill these invading pathogens to prevent them from further infecting the body and from spreading to other parts of the body. For reasons unknown, and this is the cytokine storm that you hear about commonly discussed. It's the cytokine storm that ends up killing people from COVID-19. It's the same in sepsis. For reasons unknown, this cytokine storm is the body's over-injection of this chromatin material into your bloodstream. For reasons unknown, in certain patients infected with COVID-19 and sepsis, there's a misregulation of the body's injection of NETs, and it continuously injects NETs in levels much greater than needed. What that does is that causes the immune system to become compromised and in some cases to fail. And it also causes organ failure. And this is what ends up killing a patient from these two pathogens. So here you can see some of the results. We have demonstrated thus far in last summer in COVID-19 that we have a blood test, an assay that can quantify the amount of chromatin material or NETs that have been injected into a patient's bloodstream. And when we looked at COVID-19 patients, we saw a very strong and direct linear correlation between the amount of NETs that was in a COVID-19 patient's bloodstream and the severity of their immune response to COVID-19 infection. So those patients that were asymptomatic or had very mild reaction to COVID-19 infection had the lowest levels of NETs injected into their bloodstream. And on the flip side, those patients that had severe reaction or severe reactions to COVID-19 infections, and we define that as requiring hospitalization, ventilation, intubation, oxygen, and so forth, those patients had by far the highest levels of NETs injected into their bloodstream. So we're seeing some of the same results in sepsis. So we know that by taking a measurement of the amount of NETs, by actually quantifying that amount, we know which patients have the severe immune response and those that have an asymptomatic immune response. What we hope to do is identify whether or not the body injects these NETs in advance of the onset of severe symptoms. So that's the question that we have not answered. We know that there's a strong correlation between the amount of NETs and the person's immune response to these two invading pathogens. What we don't know is how far in advance, if at all, does the body inject NETs into your bloodstream, and then your body has the severe immune response. So in other words, if there's a delay of 12, 24, 36, 48, 72 hours between overinjection of NETs and the onset of very severe symptoms, that patient can be triaged. That patient can be admitted to the hospital, given antibiotics, given oxygen, whatever the protocol, the treatment options would be. Because right now what happens, for instance, in COVID-19, if you're confirmed infected with COVID-19, yet you're asymptomatic, what happens now? You're sent home to isolate, right? But for some patients, a couple days later, they have a really bad reaction to COVID-19 infection. And in many cases, they have to rush themselves, or someone has to rush them back to the hospital, hope that they can get a hospital bed, hope that there's oxygen available for them, hope that there's a doctor or a nurse available to tend to them. In many cases, they're not getting the treatment that they need. So there's damage being done to their lungs, to their heart, to other organs. And in some cases, patients are dying because of the cytokine storm and because they weren't getting medical resources fast enough. So a tool like this will be incredibly useful to identify those patients that are likely to progress to the severe symptoms of these two pathogen infections and those patients that are not. And so it'd be a much more efficient allocation of medical resources as well. Right now, a lot of people are sent home when they should be admitted to the hospital, and a lot of people are in the hospital that aren't going to die of COVID-19 or sepsis, and they should be sent home. So there's a misallocation of resources that we hope that this product will realign the allocation of resources better, and also be able to get people that are likely to have these severe responses into the hospital and to get medical resources to reduce morbidity rates and reduce mortality rates. So we're really excited about the NETosis program. I don't have a lot of time left, so I'll just quickly talk about our cancers in humans. We have programs underway in lung cancer, colorectal cancer, and looking at two bloodborne cancers, subtypes of leukemia and lymphoma, all very large markets for us, all blood-based modalities. Really excited about the opportunities here in these three human cancer types. And then I do want to save a couple minutes for questions, so I'll just go to our key financials slide. We're listed on the NYSE American Stock Exchange, ticker VNRX. Market cap's been around the $150 to $200 million range, burning about $2 million per month. We ended Q2 with about $28 million in cash, so we have a strong cash position. We have 5 analysts covering the company. We have Zacks, we have Aegis Capital, we have the Benchmark Company, we have Cantor Fitzgerald, and we have Maxim Group covering the company. About 50 million shares out basic, about 55 million shares out fully diluted. Very clean cap table. We have no warrants, we have no convertible debt, we have no preferred, no equity lines, strong insider ownership. Insiders own about 17.5% of the shares. Institutions have about 33%. And that is the Volition VNRX story. Happy to answer any questions that anyone might have.
Love the presentation, Scott. One quick question for you here. So related to the new QNet, this isn't something, this like aspect of nets and the cytokine storm, this isn't something that I've personally heard about. I feel like we haven't heard a ton about this. Why do you think it is that, like you sound like you're pretty optimistic on this as potentially helping, COVID-19 severe cases? Do you have any sense why we haven't heard more about this kind of in the main street?
I believe we're really the first company that's using the technology.
Great answer.
To do this. We our new Q capture program, we've had some amazing scientific and biological breakthroughs in our R&D program. We have a lot of patents filed. We're just doing some amazing cutting edge things.
Great to hear, man. Thanks for coming on, Scott. Scott Powell. He is Executive VP and Head of Investor Relations over at VolitionRx. It's ticker VNRX. Until next time, Scott.
Thank you, Brent. Appreciate it.
Yep. Have a good day, sir.
Thank you. You too.